Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Monday, March the 8th, 2021. So what do you think I'm going to talk about today? Well, I guess it would have to be Meghan Mertz, wouldn't it? The woman who decided she was going to destroy the British royal family while wearing $1 million worth of clothes in 1 year. From the Daily Mail, racism drove me out of Britain and the Queen was too busy to meet me. Harry piles on new insults to his family as he accuses his grandmother of snub, but clears her and Philip of making race remark. Prince Harry today claimed racism drove him and Meghan out of Britain and the Queen was too busy to meet him as he piled on new insults to his family in a series of unseen clips from his bombshell Oprah Winfrey interview. Yes, Meghan Mertz is apparently great friends with Oprah. Such a great friend that when she invited Oprah to her wedding to Prince Harry, she had never met her. She also invited George Clooney, another person that she had never met. Who does that, by the way? Meanwhile, Prince Philip was cleared of making a racist remark about how dark Archie's skin would be, with Oprah saying Harry had confirmed the comment was not made by the Duke of Edinburgh or the Queen. Their child, who is amusingly called Archie, full stop, is whiter than white, which brings up the question as to whether Meghan Mertz has ever been pregnant. All the strange mystery around the birth of this child, the registration of the name and the like. I, for one, do not believe that Archie is a natural child of Harry and Meghan. Asked about the alleged comment at his COVID press conference today, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, "The best thing I can say is that I've always had the highest admiration for the Queen and the unifying role she plays. And as for all other matters to do with the royal family, I've spent a long time now not commenting on royal family matters, and I don't intend to today." Well, that proves that Boris Johnson is a wiser person than Jen Psaki, Joe Biden's press secretary. In one of the previously unseen clips released today, Harry said the Queen told him she wanted to see him and Meghan in Sandringham the moment they returned from a trip in Canada in January 2020, but he then received a message from a royal aide saying the trip was off. Harry claimed he then rang the Queen from Frogmore Cottage, and she said, "Yes, there's something in my diary that I didn't know I had." The prince said the exchange showed that even the Queen could be overruled by aides who he accused of giving her very bad advice. Well, you know, it seems that Harry, who of course is a wastrel idiot who thought it would be very amusing to swan around in a Nazi uniform, has learned much from Meghan Mertz. And whenever I think of Meghan, I'm reminded of Mary McCarthy's famous line about Lillian Hellman. He said he was told by an unidentified person at a charity event, "You need to understand that the UK is very bigoted." To which he replied, "The US is not bigoted. The UK press is bigoted, specifically the tabloids. But unfortunately, if the source of info is inherently corrupt or racist or biased, then that filters out to the rest of society." Meghan also discussed her own family with Oprah for the first time, claiming that she didn't have a relationship with her sister Samantha, and that she only changed her surname back to Markle when she started dating Harry. It came as Tory MPs today led the backlash against Prince Harry and Meghan's appalling accusations of racism against the royal family as they accused the couple of detonating nuclear weapons with the allegations. I'm going to be talking about Enoch Powell a little later in this show, and of course, he predicted everything that would happen in Britain in a famous speech in Birmingham. Princess Charles has made peace with being trapped as part of the royal family, but William can't escape. We are all, in one way or another, trapped by our families. We don't get to choose who our parents are. But apparently this is something of a revelation to Prince Harry and even to Meghan Mertz, who decided of her own free will to marry into the royal family. Of course, she had no idea what she was getting into. She knew nothing about the royal family. This is the same woman who was pictured at the age of 15 in front of Buckingham Palace. Meghan claims the coverage she received in the media was worse than Kate because of the color of her skin. Oprah says Harry told her neither the Queen nor Philip made racist comment about Archie being too brown. As I say, this child is whiter than white. This afternoon, Boris Johnson defended the Queen. In the main interview aired early this morning, the couple revealed the gender of their baby, a girl due this summer. Kate, Duchess of Cambridge, made Meghan cry ahead of the royal wedding, but owned it and apologized. Meghan describes meeting the Queen for the first time and having to learn to curtsy from Sarah Ferguson. Sussexes say that they speak to Her Majesty regularly on Zoom and called last week when Prince Philip became ill. Duchess claims she was naive when she joined the royal family and never researched what it would be like, despite her acquaintances saying different. Says she was initially welcomed, but later silenced. Ho, ho, ho. When has Meghan Mertz ever been silenced by anyone? And she felt trapped by officials who took away her passport. Duchess said at some point she felt that she no longer wanted to live and says she asked the palace for help. This isn't singular to Meghan Mertz, but here's a woman who says in a TV interview that when she was allegedly pregnant with her first child, she considered killing herself and her unborn child, and she thinks that this is supposed to garner sympathy for her. Well, it works. It works with some people at any rate. Harry says his family failed to support and understand them and reveals Charles stopped speaking to him. Couple show off hens they rescued from farm, as Meghan says they want to live authentically in their $14 million mansion. Share unseen picture of Archie at beach as Harry says he is hurt, but respects withdrawal of his patronages. This is a man who abandoned his family and abandoned his country, but he's hurt because his patronages were taken away from him. Recalling a conversation he had at a Centebail fundraiser, he said he was urged by someone who was friends with a lot of editors, please don't do this with the media, they will destroy your life. However, he did not identify who the person was. Harry said, one of the people at that dinner said to me, please don't do this with the media, they will destroy your life. This person is friends with a lot of the editors. I said, so I just elaborate, what do you mean? He said, you need to understand that the UK is very bigoted. Well, if the United Kingdom was really that bigoted, if the royal family is that bigoted, then this marriage between Harry and Meghan would not have been allowed. And Meghan insisted that despite the fact that Harry is a minor royal, that all the stops be pulled out for a £1 million stunner of a wedding. And once again, if the royal family were really that bigoted, they would have said, look, you have a quiet wedding ceremony, all right? You are not going to be king ever. So this is a little out of bounds. But no, that's not what happened. Let's see. Oh, this is pretty good. Again from the Mail, Meghan and Harry unleashed bombshell after bombshell in their Oprah interview that was sure to send shockwaves pulsing through the heart of the monarchy. The Mail drills down on some of the central claims of the interview. Meghan never researched the royal family prior to joining. Meghan said, I didn't do any research about what that would mean. She said, I never looked up my husband online. Fact check, unlikely. Meghan's claim that she never researched Harry nor the royal family before entering into the relationship is at odds with claims made in the couple's biography. Although the Sussexes maintain they did not contribute to Finding Freedom, it was written by friendly journalists Omid Scobie and Carolyn Durand, who say the book was impeccably well-sourced by those closest to the people. Prior to their first date at Dean Street Townhouse in 2016, The authors write, naturally, both participants in this blind date did their homework with a thorough Google search. Harry, who scoped out Meghan on social media, was interested. A friend has also claimed to have impressed on Meghan the attention she would command for dating Harry, saying, "This could be crazy. You will be the most wanted woman." Harry and Meghan were actually secretly wed 3 days before the Windsor ceremony by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Wow. Quite a whopper. I suspect that Meghan got this idea from watching an episode of the American version of The Office, where Jim and Pam do that very thing. Fact check, unlikely. Church of England marriages require at least 2 witnesses, and the public must also have unrestricted access to the building during any marriage ceremony to allow for valid objections against the marriage. At the time, the couple were living in the grounds of Kensington Palace, and their residence is off limits to the public. A couple who are already lawfully married cannot choose to remarry each other unless there is some doubt as to the validity of the earlier marriage. Reverend David Green, vicar of St. Mary's, West Malling, and the rector of St. Michael's, Offham, said it was impossible to have had 2 weddings, adding, "I think the Archbishop needs to clarify what did or did not happen 3 days before." This means that one of the 2 ceremonies was more likely just an exchange of vows rather than a legally recognized marriage. Archie has a birthright to be prince. Meghan said, "Idea of the first member of color in this family not being titled in the same way that other grandchildren would be. It's not their right to take away." Fact check, false. Archie did not have a birthright to be a prince, but could be potentially one when Charles accedes to the throne. That William and Kate's children have the HRH title and are styled as prince and princesses, and Archie is not, stems from a ruling more than 100 years ago. In 1917, King George V issued a written order that only royal offspring who are in the direct line of succession could be made a prince and receive HRH titles. Under the rules, only Prince William and the Duchess of Cambridge's eldest son, Prince George, as a great-grandson of the monarch down the direct line of succession to the throne, was originally entitled to be a prince. The Queen stepped in ahead of George's birth in 2013 to issue a letters patent to ensure all George's siblings, as the children of future monarch William, would have fitting titles, meaning they were extended to Charles and Louis. Under the George V rules, Archie would be entitled to be an HRH or prince when his grandfather Charles, the Prince of Wales, accedes to the throne. Archie wouldn't get 24/7 security because he wasn't a prince. Meghan said, "In those months when I was pregnant, all around the same time, so we had the conversation, if he won't be given security, he's not going to be given a title." Fact check, false. Being a prince or princess does not automatically mean royals have police protection. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie's security is no longer paid for by the taxpayer. Harry and Meghan no longer receive British police protection and are understood to be paying for private security. Kate made Meghan cry before her wedding to Harry. Responding to claims that she reduced Kate to tears, Meghan said, no, the reverse happened. Fact check, contested. Reports of a pre-wedding clash between the duchesses first emerged in November 2018 when sources claimed Meghan had been displeased with a stressful dress fitting for the Flower Girls. Accounts differed as to the source of the row. Some said it was a disagreement on whether the bridesmaids should wear tights. Meghan reportedly believed they should not. Other reports said it stemmed from Princess Charlotte's dress not fitting, meaning another had to be scheduled. A source at the time said Kate had only just given birth to her 3rd child, Prince Louis, and was feeling quite emotional. Couple witnessed racism inside the monarchy. Fact check, almost impossible to verify. Harry and Meghan said they will never reveal the person who made these comments. However, Oprah revealed that Harry confirmed it was not the Queen nor Prince Philip. While currently not commenting on the contents interview, Buckingham Palace are almost certain to push back on suggestions of institutional racism. They could launch an investigation, as they have done with claims of bullying. Yes, Meghan's staff leaks more bodies than a Chinese ferry, to steal a joke from Veep. There's also the incident in Australia where Meghan supposedly hurled a cup of scalding tea at a royal courtier, and this woman was paid off with £25,000. There's now an investigation going on into Meghan's bullying of royal staff. Harry was financially cut off from the royals. Fact check. They wanted to be financially independent. Before cutting ties, 95% of their money came from Prince Charles's income from the Duchy of Cornwall and 5% from the taxpayer-funded sovereign grant. Princes William and Harry received most of a £13 million fortune left by their mother, Princess Diana. Harry is also thought to have had millions left to him by the Queen Mother. Meghan has not seen Samantha Markle in almost 20 years. Fact check, false. A photograph from 2008, 13 years ago, shows Meghan with Samantha at her graduation. Meghan had to turn over her passport, keys, and driving license to royal aides. Fact check, difficult to verify. And it goes on. Let's have a look at the chat. Hello to Random Number Generator and Prussian Junker, number 1, Palpcasco 88, and Dan and Head McNeck. Cecil Henry says racist is just an anti-white hate word, QED. Dionysus says this is right out of King Lear. Again from Cecil Henry, perfectly reasonable to be concerned about racial background. Where do non-whites want to go to white skin nations? Ed McNeck says Meghan had never met George Clooney. Damn, even I've met George Clooney. Gandalf White II says the removal of Trump from social media and the second impeachment followed by the elevation of the octogenarian dementia patient basically raised the prestige of the U.S. presidency. Cecil Henry on why women should never lead or vote. Every woman I see, from office secretary to university trained, just had to see Oprah's interview and all the princess drama from a porn star. Well, Meghan was a B-list actress at best, starring, she had a role as a paralegal on a show called Suits, which was on the prestigious Stars with a Z network. Of course, what happened the first time an American divorcee married into the British royal family? That didn't work out too well, did it? Okay, William Hicks says about Baltimore graduation and functional illiteracy rate you mentioned last week, but there's a high percentage who own smartphones used for rap music and porn, but Dr. Seuss and Pepe Le Pew are the problem. Random Number Generator says, well, plus he's, let's face it, that shouldn't happen in tradition. Well, you see, there's long-standing rumors that Prince Harry is not the natural son of Prince Charles. I think the thing about Harry that people should appreciate is that he is a deeply, deeply stupid man. Claire Caw says, yes, we all saw it coming, but the BBC gloating about it being racist to wonder at the shade of Archie is the most vomit-inducing. Random Number Generator, I feel peace knowing these two clowns will preside over the most precipitous 4-year decline in American history. Okay. Mertz was, yes, there's also rumors that Meghan Mertz was what they call a yachter. But let's see. Robert Hardman writes in the Mail, of all the so-called bombshells, this was the big one, the 50-megaton whopper dumped from high at the 40-minute mark. No wonder it prompted the usually unflappable Oprah Winfrey to emit a what? As to explain the lack of a princely title for her baby son, the Duchess of Sussex replied, I can give you an honest answer. Whereupon, kerpow, cue detonation. We have in tandem the conversation of he won't be given security, he's not going to be given a title, and also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be. In this one sentence, the institution of monarchy was simultaneously traduced as spiteful, withholding royal status from the seventh in line to the throne, callous, denying him protection, and worst of all, racist. If one is seeking the big constitutional question amid the psychodrama, this is it. To which I will simply echo the Duchess and give an honest answer of my own. I don't believe it. The couple, assisted by Oprah Winfrey, went into all these charges at length, as viewers will have seen last night, but ultimately their claims fall down on 2 counts and are, at best, hazy on the third. Time and again during the show, we heard rightly much being made of the truth, though palace staff were very specifically accused of telling lies. So it is only right that we should submit the most incendiary of moments to closer scrutiny. At the time of their son's birth, it was made very clear by the couple's own staff, no less, that the Sussexes did not want a title for Archie. There was much obfuscation on other matters, you may recall, not least when the Sussex staff announced that the Duchess was going into labor 8 hours after she had already given birth. However, on the title, things were crystal clear. No handle, thanks. Archie actually had a choice of titles. He was, and in theory still is, the Earl of Dumbarton, the courtesy title for the eldest son of the Duke of Sussex. Having decided that Archie's earldom was too grand, the couple could have styled him Lord Archie, according to established form for the son of a duke. But no, the couple wanted none of it. He would be plain Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, as Omid Scobie, the couple's biographer and favorite journalist, tweeted approvingly, all part of giving him a normal life as possible. Except we are now told that this is all untrue. Meghan and Harry really did want him to be a prince after all. It was the royal family and or the courtiers, we never know for sure, who refused. It was the decision they felt was appropriate, said Meghan. There's no explanation. Oh, and some more voices. Meghan Markle, 39, is living the life Princess Diana should have had since stepping away from the royal family, an American poet has claimed. LA-based poet and activist Amanda Gorman shared a string of tweets praising the Duchess hours after her bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey. She tweeted, "Meghan is living the life Diana should have, if only those around her had been as brave as she was. Meghan isn't living a life without pain, but a life without a prison. This isn't Meghan's princess's happy ending. But sometimes change, the decisions that bring us the most hurt, aren't about happiness, but healing. Unclear if this will change the royal family, but Meghan's strength will certainly redefine family everywhere. Think of the women who will be inspired to stand up for their lives, their partners who will be kinder and more courageous than the kin they were born into." What else do we have from this woman? That one gets the impression that Amanda Gorman, despite being some sort of official poetess of the United States, doesn't really know English very well. That is perhaps her second language. Hang on just a second. I want to pull this up here. One of her tweets. Amanda Gorman, official poetess of the United States, writes, "Meghan was the crown's greatest opportunity for change, regeneration, and reconciliation in a new era. They didn't just maltreat her light, they missed out on it." This is a professional wordsmith, incredibly. Let's see what the Telegraph has to say. And famous friends who have spoken up for her. When the Duke and Duchess of Sussex left Britain last March, it was the Duchess of Cornwall who pointedly commented, "Our loss is America's gain," recalls Katie Nichol. No, I'm reminded of a famous statement made by a joke made by Oscar Levant when he heard that the comedian Milton Berle had left Judaism and converted to Christian Science. He said, "Our loss is their loss." Indeed. U.S. reaction, America's fury at royal family over Duchess of Sussex racism accusations. Serena Williams, the U.S. tennis star who co-hosted the Duchess's baby shower in 2019, says she was a victim of systematic oppression. She said, Meghan Markle, my selfless friend, lives her life and leads by example with empathy and compassion. She teaches me every day what it means to be truly noble. Her words illustrate the pain and cruelty she's experienced. Williams added, I know firsthand the sexism and racism institutions and the media use to vilify women and people of color to minimize us. Yes, Serena Williams, famous for being a wallflower. The Duchess of Sussex has revealed she had suicidal thoughts and struggled with her mental health after joining the royal family, Josie Ensor writes. The Duchess, 39, said in the extraordinarily candid interview that the stress and isolation drove her to contemplate taking her own life while pregnant with Archie. Again, we're supposed to feel sympathy for this woman. She claimed she told a senior palace official that she wanted to get treatment for her depression, but was denied because it would look bad. Going to hospital is what I was asking to do. I was told I couldn't because it wouldn't be good for the institution, the Duchess told Oprah. One really has to admire this woman's ability to tell such outrageous whoppers with a straight face. By raising the specter of racism, Prince Harry and Meghan have pressed on a sore that has long been one of the royal family's weaknesses, writes Gordon Rayner. How has this been one of the royal family's weaknesses? For a monarch determined to slim down and modernize the royal family for the 21st century, the Queen's decision not to give her great-grandson Archie the title of prince made perfect sense. The White House praised the Duchess of Sussex's courage in sharing her struggles with mental health, reports our U.S. editor Nick Allen. Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, was asked if Joe Biden had watched the interview and what he thought about the racism they, the Duke and Duchess, felt. Psaki said, let me say, first, obviously, many of us caught the interview, as many Americans did, and around the world. Meghan Markle is a private citizen, and so is Harry at this point. For anyone to come forward and speak about their own struggles with mental health and tell their own personal story, that takes courage. And that's certainly something the president believes. And he's talked about the importance of investing in these areas that they're committed to in the future as well. She added, we aren't going to provide additional commentary from here on behalf of the president or others, given these are private citizens sharing their own story and their own struggles. And let me just reiterate, we have a strong and abiding relationship with the British people and a special partnership with the government of the UK on a range of issues, and that will continue. Yes, the special partnership. What does Britain get out of this, actually? And, okay, moving on here. Omid Scobie is a friend of the Markles and a co-biographer. He claims that he is the victim of racism himself. Yeah. Harry and Meghan's friend Omid Scobie stuns Good Morning Britain viewers by accusing royals of hushing up claims against Prince Andrew and insists bullying allegations are far removed from their experience at the palace. Yes. This fellow Omid Scobie, if someone had told me that he was white, I would have said, yeah, okay. He certainly looks it. But apparently he is of mixed race. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's royal biographer, Omid Scobie, has revealed his experience with racism in a candid post. The British writer, who has co-written the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's upcoming biography, Finding Freedom, took to Twitter amid the Black Lives Matter movement to speak out against injustice, revealing that fear has previously stopped him from speaking about his experiences relating to his mixed-race heritage. Omid said he recalled how he lost his first job in journalism after fighting back against a workplace incident. Yes, and again, we're supposed to believe that Britons are afraid to talk about being mixed race, whereas in actuality, it is now a trump card in Britain. Taking to Twitter, Omid wrote, I see some asking why in the past I didn't always publicly speak out about racism or racial bias. The answer, quite honestly, is fear. My first job in journalism was also my first experience of racism in the workplace. Worried that as a 20-year-old mixed race guy, taking on an older white person of power would probably mean the end of my job, I sat on the incident for a few months before mustering up the courage to present the issue to HR. Unfortunately, my complaint was met with poor excuses, a lack of empathy, and me having to leave. I felt small, ashamed, and convinced my journalism career was over before I'd even attended my university graduation ceremony. Of course, the racist in question had no such worries. They got a pay rise and continued to work in a prominent media role. Yes, that absolutely happened and is in no way a made-up story. From the Daily Express, Trisha Goddard slaps down Piers Morgan in clash with Good Morning Britain host, We decide what is racist. Okay. Trisha, 63, joined an esteemed panel on Monday's edition of Good Morning Britain as Piers Morgan, 55, and the rest of the world reacted to the Oprah Winfrey interview in which the 67-year-old broadcaster spoke to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex about their lives as members of the royal family. In the candid chat, Meghan Markle, 38, discussed how she was asked questions by certain members of the monarchy who had concerns about her son, Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor's mixed race heritage. This launched a debate about racism on the ITV news show, and the former Dancing on Ice star didn't hold back in telling the host what she thought of his opinions. The host asked, we don't know who the conversation was with or the context, but what you're saying is any context in which that conversation happened is automatically racist. Trisha replied, it only takes one straw to break the camel's back. That's not how that metaphor works. And what gets me is why everyone else is such an expert about racism against Black people. I'm sorry, Piers, but you don't get to call out what is and isn't racism against Black people. You can call out the other stuff. I'll leave you to call out the other stuff you want, but leave the racism stuff to us. Responding, the journalist said, when I think Meghan Markle calls the royal family a racist institution, it's a very serious allegation. Susanna Reid, 50, jumped in as she defended the expectant mother, telling her co-star she didn't use that term. However, Piers was having none of it as he declared they portray the royal family as racist, and it's a very incendiary charge. And I don't think it's fair to the royal family to not name the supposed racists. Oh, and a whole bunch of simps went on Twitter to defend the esteemed Trisha. One of them said, Trisha is right, and GMB has been truly unwatchable today. Piers has dismissed a woman's mental health struggle and her experience of racism. The most truly disgusting TV broadcast by ITV. Shame on all involved. A second added, Trisha is correct. It's like when men tell women what's sexist, which is also why I never listen to white people speaking on behalf of Black people's grievances and feelings. I do think the whole mysterious story of Archie's color being an issue sounds suspiciously false, though. We're expected to believe that Prince Harry marries a woman who's half Black or, 40% Black or whatever, and this would not be reflected in the biological issue. How stupid do they think that we are? I guess very stupid, actually. This again from the Express, royal expert Jenny Bond reflected on the bombshell confessions from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle as members of the royal family. While speaking on Sky News with Sarah Hewson, Bond noted that she was left questioning the couple's claims the royal family did not adequately support their mental health needs. Hewson said there were such huge hopes that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry could have been the modernizing face of the royal family. In terms of perception, when you have someone making allegations that there is racism at the heart of the family, that mental health concerns were swept under the carpet, that Meghan called out for help and was told by the institution that she couldn't get help because it wouldn't look good. That is hugely damaging, isn't it? I don't understand that. She had mental health problems, as did Prince Harry, which is terrible and must be taken seriously. But Harry knew where to get help. Prince Harry has told us he has had a lot of therapy and a lot of help. They have both spearheaded mental health campaigns. Oh, yes. Here's something else about Meghan Markle. That when she became known as Prince Harry's girlfriend, and there's a very curious timeline about this, Vanity Fair manipulated the dates so as to hide the fact that she was actually supposedly living with a chef in Toronto when she took up with Harry. Famous designers started giving her clothes for free, which she subsequently sold. And the palace told her, no, this sort of grifting is not allowed. And she was furious about this because where was she going to get, $1 million worth of clothes? Well, apparently Prince Charles stepped in to pay for it. Let's go back to the chat. Gandalf White II says, gotta love that Good Morning Britain has turned into a national TV Maoist struggle section. Random number generator says, when I'm called a racist, I don't consider it a serious charge. Well, it doesn't mean anything. And the accusation is the proof now. Black people get to decide if people are being racist, whatever that means, against them. Anran says, Kevin is right. It's the same as calling someone a witch. Paul 88 says Markle is dead behind the eyes. It's just during the interview, the constant holding hands. What are they, teenagers? Random number generator says, I agree, they should be required to submit to this asset forfeiture before they vote away middle-class workers' paychecks on failed programs. Halper says, which was discovered first, subatomic particles or racism? Is the latter discovery more important? Okay. To think that the distant progeny of the Vikings could be so cucked out that they need to be rechristened in a bloodbath of sacrifice to St. George, says Gandalf White the second. Support for the Only Lives Matter seems to be cratering, gone down from 66% to 30% in one poll I saw earlier last week, says Gandalf White the second. What is there rioting in Minneapolis yet? One of the cops accused of killing St. George Floyd is on trial now. Let's move on to a subject perhaps less amusing. But it is amusing in a way. This is from Patty Hannum at Spiked. Why the military-industrial complex went woke. I don't know whether I could link to this on Twitter because I would probably be banned for undermining confidence in the NATO alliance. Yes, Twitter is actually doing that now. This week, the world's most powerful military alliance tweeted, "Diversity is our strength." The tweet featured a video of employees of various ethnic backgrounds, including both men and women, telling viewers to respect our needs and embrace our differences. NATO encouraged Twitter users to share the tweet, which was in honor of #ZeroDiscrimination Day, to join us in celebrating the differences that make us stronger. The organization which bombed Iraq and Libya back to the dark ages is diverse. How nice. It's not just NATO that has leapt on the woke bandwagon. Former CIA boss John Brennan, the principal coordinator of a U.S. anti-terror kill list, who also oversaw American drone strikes, revealed his white guilt this week. I'm increasingly embarrassed to be a white male these days with what I see other white males say, he told MSNBC. The U.S. Army is in on the fun, too. It has its own equity and inclusion agency, which launched Project Inclusion last year. This operation included listening sessions with soldiers and civilians worldwide to converse on race, diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is just a trap. Oh, we're going to have a conversation about race. Oh, I know what that means. You're going to tell me that I have white privilege, that I'm a white supremacist, and it's my duty to keep my mouth shut and simply absorb the insults. General James McConville, Chief of Staff for the U.S. Army, said on the Army's website that it must continue to put people first, capitalized, by fostering a culture of trust that accepts the experiences and backgrounds of every soldier and civilian. Hannum comments, I wonder what the citizens of the many countries the U.S. has attacked in recent years would have to say about that. The military is signing up to the environmentalist agenda too. Both the U.S. and British armies are pursuing net zero emissions targets. The Army needs to be on the right side of the environmental argument, especially in the eyes of that next generation of recruits that increasingly make career decisions based on a prospective employer's environmental credentials, according to senior British General Sir Mark Carleton Smith. The military, with its gas-guzzling tanks and fighter jets, is a significant emitter of carbon dioxide. So apparently, in order to attract recruits for the next foreign war, we need eco-friendly death machines. The woke military trend goes beyond armies, government organizations, and international alliances. Raytheon, a defense and intelligence company which makes, among other things, aircraft engines, missiles, and drones for the U.S. military, partnered with the Girl Scouts in 2019 in order to promote a feminist message. A company representative said on Raytheon's website, we are all about using innovation to make the world a safer place. And we need engineers, especially female engineers, to drive diversity and innovation for the future of our technology. It seems Raytheon wants more diversity in its bomb-making department. Dow Chemical, famous for producing skin-burning napalm for American use in the Vietnam War, has also become a woke trend center. A Bloomberg article titled How Dow Chemical Got Woke noted that the big conservative chemical company with a legacy of making napalm has a gay CEO. It also revealed that company executives get bonuses if they hit inclusion goals. Dow also flies the gay pride flag outside its offices. A company spokesman said in 2019 that he hopes other films will look at Dow and think, wow, if this company has these stances, then shame on us. Yes, that is what companies making weapons-grade chemicals should be ashamed about. The woke turn in the military-industrial complex is ridiculous, but it also tells us a lot about wokeness itself. If even weapons dealers and armies can get on board with the latest woke fad, then is woke politics really as progressive and radical as its supporters claim? Let's not forget how quickly the world's largest corporations have jumped on board with the woke agenda as well. From McDonald's changing its Twitter handle to amplifying Black voices, to the CEO JP Morgan Chase taking the knee in front of a huge open bank vault, capitalist elites have embraced wokeness, treating it as an invaluable PR tool. But it's more than just PR. Wokeness is a toxic ideology. Its adherents say they want to bring people together, but in truth, they dehumanize and divide people on the basis of gender, race, and sexuality. Those who step out of line are harassed and abused. It's a regimented cultist value system which brooks no dissent. Woke militarism is the next logical step. Let's take a look at Jim Kunstler's column for today, which is titled Tomorrow and Kaboom. It begins with a quote from the New York Times. The Senate bill also includes a provision intended to avert surprise tax bills for people who lost jobs, waiving federal income taxes for the first $10,000 and $200 of unemployment benefits received in 2020 for households earning under $150,000. Kunstler comments, isn't that a curious concept from the front page of Reset Central? How does a couple with no jobs and no income earn $150,000 in a year that they were not working? And if they somehow brought in $150,000 anyway, why do they need the support of the U.S. government? Such are the many mysteries of the coronavirus 2020 stimulus bill. What's actually going on with this monster of legislation? Kind of looks like an attempt to replace what used to be a national economy with something that pretends to be money conjured from a system pretending to tax itself on wealth that was never generated in the first place. In other words, politicians have achieved the final divorce of wealth from production and thus economy from reality. The USA has become the big rock candy mountain. Whatever else the Soviet experiment was, it was at least predicated on producing stuff, however defective the incentives turned out to be, or how shoddy the stuff was that got produced. And the system finally crashed anyway, because it was based on fantasies of human social behavior that just didn't comport with reality. Now, the USA, in its own existential climax phase, seeks to redo the Soviet experiment, only minus that feature of industrial production. Instead, our wealth gets generated from the banking system alone and its subsidiary activities, such as hedge funds, arbitrages, dividends from companies with no earnings, and the fees for swapping digitized bundles of this and that. You understand that it's all an illusion, right? Kunstler continues, Bitcoin is the exemplar of that divorce of wealth from production. Its value appears to be derived from two features: the mathematically elegant blockchain code, which is a distributed accounting system supposedly impervious to government meddling, and mining Bitcoin using colossal amounts of electricity to churn the blockchain code is a simple dissipation of energy. What is actually produced by these operations? A promise that a set of digits residing on countless flash drives around the world equal X amount denominated in national currencies, which are themselves spun out of nothing by a process far less complex than the exertions that produce Bitcoin. It may be true that Bitcoin's distributed ledger is difficult for governments to crack, but governments can just abolish Bitcoin in a few keystrokes by criminalizing the trade of it and confiscating any theoretical profits from it. They have probably refrained so far because the traffic in Bitcoin is still relatively tiny compared to the trade in stocks, bonds, and their derivatives, and because they prefer to keep the Bitcoin model running as a demonstration project in preparation for their own entry into national cryptocurrencies, with all its advantages for tracking individual transactions and targeting tax liabilities. Let's spell out the more blatant shortcomings of Bitcoin. The blockchain may be theoretically bomb-proof, but the exchanges that Bitcoin trades on can be fiddled, hijacked, and erased from the universe, and Bitcoins with them. Remember Mt. Gox? When it went tits up in 2014, 850,000 Bitcoins vanished out of the 21 million that could ever be mined under the system as designed. Bitcoins were worth under $1,000 when that happened. Also keep in mind that Bitcoin is meaningless without reliable electric service and the internet that runs on it. How many Bitcoins were bought and sold in Texas those dark days a couple of weeks ago when a blue norther rolled in and the lights went out? Of course, trading Bitcoin might be the least of your problems when the pipes freeze and all the sheetrock in your house gets prepped for a black mold experiment. The Schumer-Pelosi gang looks exorbitantly proud of their legislative coup in the STEM bill, and Mitch McConnell's gang too, which had to play along or get tagged and canceled as Dr. Seuss-like creatures of Grinchified parsimony. Obtuse, desperate, and stupid as these grandstanding politicians are, they all overlook the workings of entropy in these foolish expedients to keep the plates spinning in this performance art economy, namely disorder. Everything is groaning and cracking out there. One-time $1,400 handouts and even regular $300 unemployment subsidies won't pay the mortgages or feed families very long. And every day there are fewer families bringing in anything close to that mythical $150,000. For many, it's more like nothing. The one-time bailouts of recklessly insolvent city and state governments and pension funds will only postpone their collapse. The varying guaranteed basic income schemes, enhanced child credits, advances on tax refunds, and other gimmicks would turn the former working class into sub-lumpenproles with nothing to occupy them but crime and vice. In fact, we already have a sizable underclass demonstrating exactly what you'll get from enlarging the social group dependent on government support. The only other question for now is, when do the different population groups in this land explode in violence? The group loosely bundled as red is angry enough with the ongoing insults of wokery, failed rule of law, and abridgments of basic constitutional rights. The states where they dominate are likely to resist any more fiats by the federal government, like the imminent attempt to confiscate firearms. The blue auxiliary armies are beyond their creators' control. Antifa will be ready to rock and roll in the streets with good weather because so many young people have absolutely no prospects to thrive in the collapsing economy, and the streets have become their social space with so little money for lattes and beers. And Black Lives Matter need look no further than the Derek Chauvin trial in Minnesota starting today, for an excuse to resume its characteristic activities. Kunstler concludes, does anyone seriously believe that the husk of Joe Biden will remain in office more than another few weeks? It's obvious that he doesn't have the mental mojo to work an authentic press conference, and surely not the customary address to a joint session of Congress. Even the news media may seek to know who is actually in charge of the executive branch before much longer. Pay close attention to events unspooling. Get ready for trouble. It's coming every which way, from money to public order to rollicking spring weather. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. We got a lot from Gandalf White the Second here. Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, and thank you for your services. I haven't deleted any comments. John S. has a comment about Kunstler. What is this? Does KMG live in this hotel room? Yes, I do. I've been living in this same hotel room since December the 17th. John S. says, tell Kunstler to ask Weave about the utility of Bitcoin sans electricity. I'm not quite sure what that means. I hope Kamala lets me keep my breech loader, says Hauper. William Hicks says, everything is useless when the electricity goes out. Always love that when there's a complete breakdown of order and martial law happens, Bitcoin won't work. You know, I used to write about the gold industry, and I used to write about gold as an investment. And I saw a few years ago that the government can simply slap down the price of gold anytime they want with mysterious multi-billion-dollar trades in the middle of the night when everyone is asleep. If Bitcoin becomes regarded as a threat to the US dollar, it will be destroyed. It's that simple. And I don't know how anyone could believe that, oh no, we're completely safe. If the US government decides to turn against you, you are in very serious problem. You're in a very serious difficulty. Chad Chadson lean on KMG to link his YouTube channel to odyssey.com for backup. No reason not to. No, I will get around to this soon enough. Random number generator says, when there's a collapse, the elite will take to their jets to the next country they plan on destroying. They won't be affected. That's assuming they can get to the helicopters soon enough. Gandalf White says, luckily, most of the world's major powers are also facing existential problems. Both Russia and China also have terrible demographics. So Trump was bad. He failed America on COVID-19. That's what we're told. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has opened up the U.S. border to Mexico, and thousands of people with COVID-19 are entering America, which makes absolutely perfect sense. This is really the kind of stuff one associates with dying regimes. Okay, I'm going to, speaking of dying regimes and the elite, I'm going to return to James Burnham and his discussion of Vilfredo Pareto. And he talks about the classes. Analysis can, Pareto believes, show that there are a good many residues operative in social action. For convenience, he divides them into 6 main classes, though other divisions might be substituted without altering the main theory. Class 1, instinct for combinations. This is the tendency which leads human beings to combine or manipulate various elements taken arbitrarily from experience. Many magical practices are a result of its operation. The manipulations to control weather or disease, to bring good luck, the supposed efficacy assigned to certain numbers, 3 or 7 or 13, for example, suitably employed totems, and so on. Supposed connections are established between certain events, formulas, prayers, or words, and good or bad luck, happiness or terror or sorrow. At a complex level, it is this residue that leads restless individuals to large-scale financial manipulations, merging and combining and recombining of various economic enterprises, efforts to entangle and disentangle political units to make and remake empires. It is residues of class 1 also that impel men to system making, that is, to elaborate logical or rather pseudo-logical combinations of ideas and mental elements in general to theologies and metaphysics and ideologies of all sorts. Thus, it is this class of residue that chiefly accounts for derivations, expressing man's need to make his own behavior seem rational. Class 2, group persistences. When once any combination has been formed, forces come into play to keep that combination sustained and persisting. There are, one might say, conservative forces present among animals as well as human beings, and sometimes referred to as social inertia. They express themselves, for instance, in the powerful feeling that the family or the tribe or the city or the nation is a permanent and objective entity. So strong are they that the dead and the not yet living are included in the supposedly persisting unit, and we thus have all the many forms of ancestor worship, belief in immortality, and social provisions made for a posterity that will not exist until all living persons are long dead. Family pride, class solidarity, patriotism, religious zeal are all quite direct modes of these residues. They account also for the feeling that property becomes a permanent part of man's being, so much so that certain objects are even placed with the dead body in the grave, or for the love of the native soil. In another direction, they give persisting life to abstractions and personifications, gods and heroes and platonic forms, and natural law and progress and the state and the moral will, and many other creatures of the dynamic human imagination are endowed with substance and enduring realities. These class 2 residues, as Pareto describes them, are usually accompanied by a willingness to use force in order to maintain the solidity and persistence of the entities in question, to save the nation or the true faith, for example. We shall later see that Pareto considers class 1 and class 2 residues to be the most important in influencing changes in political and social structure. Class 3, need of expressing sentiments by external acts, residues of self-expression and activity. Most human beings constantly feel the need to do something, whether or not the something done can accomplish any desired purpose. Ignorance of medical science in no way stops the family from bustling about when someone is ill. Most persons always feel that something must be done to improve political and economic conditions, even though they have not the slightest idea whether what they do, making speeches or campaigning for votes or advocating this or that reform, will in fact affect conditions favorably. And most people are very impatient with anyone who remains passive while civilization is being destroyed. This class of residues is plainly connected with class 1, making combinations is one of the chief forms of activity. Class 4, residues connected with sociality. This class, and also class 5, as Pareto treats them, are related to residues of class 2, and it is somewhat arbitrary to separate them in theory. Indeed, with the exception of class 6, sex residues, all residues tend to fall into two main classes. 1, combinations, the tendencies to change, newness, manipulation, speculations, obsess, progress, and 2, group persistences, the tendencies to inertia, resistance to change, social solidarity, conservation, and conformity. However, under class 4, Pareto groups such factors as the need felt by the individual for conformity with the group, and his effort to force conformity on others, the distrust or hatred of innovation, the opposite but related social sentiments of pity and cruelty, the willingness to sacrifice life or comfort or property for the supposed good of others, the sentiments of social ranking and hierarchy present in most persons feelings, that is, that some individuals are superior, some inferior in the social scale, and the almost universal need for group approval. Most of these feelings and the significant part they play in providing a foundation for social life have been noted by writers on society from the time of the Greek philosophers. We should keep in mind that what is distinctive in Pareto's analysis of them is his general contention that they are all non-logical in origin. They may yield good or bad results that will depend upon the circumstances, but they continue to function in any case, not from deliberate intention, but independent of all processes of rational thought. We do not conform with the group and its customs because we have a theory that thereby our own life becomes more satisfactory. We begin with a tendency to conform, and only later do we invent or adopt a theory that this is the best way of life. We do not sacrifice our life for our country because we believe in some complex philosophical theory, of which many are available, about the nature of social life and the state. A tendency to self-sacrifice is prior to the theories, and they are only an attempt, under the pressure of class 1 residues, to give the tendency a pleasing logical form. Class 5, integrity of the individual and his appurtenances. In general, according to Pareto's account, these are the feelings that lead men to guard their personal integrity, to maintain themselves in the conditions of their existence, together with whatever they happen to identify with themselves and those conditions of existence. For example, there is the usual strong feeling against any serious alteration in the social structure. In a slave society, most people are indignant at a proposal for doing away with slaves. In a capitalist society, at attacks on the rights of property. And the indignation, which would seem natural enough in the case of slaveholders or capitalists, extends to the other members of the social group who do not have slaves or capital wealth. Many of those who fought most bravely on the Southern side during the Civil War never owned or could hope to own slaves. Many of those who have fought in the United States Army in order, so some of their leaders have told them, to defend free enterprise never owned or had any prospect of owning a share of that enterprise. Nevertheless, they have identified the preservation of their own integrity with the preservation of social structure. When something has gone wrong, has violated the integrity of the individual, he seeks to restore his integrity. A taboo has been broken, so a purification ceremony is performed. As in the case of baptism, the purification may be required because of the impiety of a very distant or even mythical ancestor. The individual must reassert himself after a slip. A purgatory must restore a balance that has been upset during real life, or the integrity is restored by actions directed against the real or supposed violator. That is, vengeance must be carried out, the criminal punished, the heretic burned. Pareto also holds this class of residues responsible for many of the feelings of social equality. Such feelings, he shows, are never what they seem to be, but are always in fact a drive toward extra privileges for the group that adheres to the doctrine of equality that may be in question. The post-Renaissance bourgeoisie, calling for equality, wanted in fact the transfer of the major social privileges from the feudal aristocrats to themselves. Analogously today, in the case of the working class demands for equality, from the point of view of this analysis, there is no contradiction in the evident fact that a nation fighting sincerely for equality can at the same time accept internal practices of racial and religious discrimination. The contradiction exists only in the words used, which are of slight influence, and not in the feeling which the words in their own curious way express. We can see this directly with the woke movement, that the people who pursue this movement are not looking really for equity for the supposedly oppressed. They are claiming more privileges for themselves, and they receive more privileges as a result of their wokeness. Finally, class 6, the sex residue. The merely biological sex urge is not, properly speaking, a residue. The sex residue functions only where it receives an expression that is at least partly verbal, where theories and literature and moral rules and religious doctrines are used as the ever-varying but always present disguises and distortions of the sex impulse. In his treatment of the sex residue and its sublimations, Pareto is not unlike Freud, though he was apparently not directly acquainted with Freud's writings. These 6, then, or others of the same sort, are the major and relatively unchanging model unchanging nuclei of non-logical conduct, the conduct that makes up the greater proportion of human action, and in particular of those actions that affect the course of government and history. And I will return to discussion of Pareto tomorrow. Brandon Smith says, Blue cities literally turning red in the streets. Chogokin666 says, press 1 if you have ever stepped in sex residue. Random number generator says, upper middle class near burbs will be absolute hell. Gandalf White says, to be at all relatively unscathed, and even that is doubtful to a degree, you need to be at least 30 to 40 miles away from a city center. CL says, according to China's official narrative, Western socialists are also part of the reactionary and imperialist bourgeoisie. Okay. Let's talk about Enoch Powell. I've been thinking about Enoch Powell because I've been watching Adam Curtis's new documentary, Can't Get You Out of My Head, which is on the BBC iPlayer, which is restricted to residents of Britain. I'll explain why this is. the BBC has the right to use any copyrighted material for free. And Adam Curtis makes full use of this, particularly in the music, for his documentaries, which this is the reason why they're restricted to the iPlayer and why there have never been, say, DVDs or Blu-rays made of his documentaries. However, at least for the time being, I Can't Get You Out of My Head is available on YouTube. Curtis is fond of parallelisms, and he derives one in Can't Get You Out of My Head between Enoch Powell and a fellow called Michael DeFreitas, latterly known as Michael X. We are seeing DeFreitas speaking passionately about the belief, his belief supposedly, that when he left Trinidad to move to England, he was somehow coming home. It's a fatuous belief, but it was one that was encouraged by the British government at the time, with the results that Enoch Powell warned us about. Now, yes, I see that DeFreitas was called Red Mike. He had freckles. And very strange thing in the documentary, when people turned against Michael X, one of them is interviewed as a black woman, is interviewed as saying, well, no, he never had any interest in helping black people. Why? Because he was half white. The significance of this comment from this black woman in England seems to fly completely over Adam Curtis's head. Yes, apparently race is an illusion. Is it? I don't think it is. I don't think most people regard it as an illusion. Michael DeFreitas worked as an enforcer for a gangster called Peter Rockman. Rockman had come up, Rockman, who has a very murky personal history, had somehow been allowed to come to Britain after the end of the Second World War. And he decided to become a property tycoon. And what he did, he used blockbusting to accomplish this. That he would bring Caribbean people into apartment buildings, and their presence led to whites in the building fleeing. I suppose one of the reasons is they didn't like hearing loud music at 2 o'clock in the morning. And since these apartments were in some way rent controlled, this meant that Peter Rockman could rent them out at steep cost to prostitutes and Caribbean immigrants. And people who got on the wrong side of Peter Rockman, well, he sent Michael DeFreitas after them. And their apartments would be smashed up or they would be beaten up. Rockman became a notorious figure, and the phrase Rockmanism actually entered the English language. He died fairly early of a heart attack, and Michael DeFreitas decided to set up solo as a race hustler. And it was very lucrative for him. John Lennon gave him a fair amount of money. In fact, I believe that he auctioned the famous white piano that he wrote Imagine on to raise money for Michael X. John Lennon also sang about karma. And so I suppose if people believe in that, they should not be surprised that a man who supported both the IRA and Michael X ended up being shot to death. So Michael X eventually returned to Trinidad and set himself up as a black revolutionary. And he ended up being convicted of the murder of a British woman who very foolishly had followed the guru to Trinidad. He attempted to escape in Guyana, but was captured, returned to Trinidad, and hanged in 1975. Enoch Powell, on the other hand, was not a gangster, and he was, unlike Michael X, actually English. He was a polymath who became a full professor at the age of 25 at the University of Sydney. He loved Germany, but he hated the Nazi regime so much that when war was declared in 1939, he resigned his post in Sydney and traveled halfway around the world to return to Britain to serve his country. And he enlisted in the army as a private soldier and ended up as a brigadier, a general, a remarkable achievement. Powell had ambitions of becoming Viceroy of India, and he learned Indian languages. He loved the Indian people. But Powell had the collapse of the British Empire, which is a theme of Curtis's documentary, had a profound effect on Enoch Powell. He blamed America to a large extent for this, but he realized after India became independent and was partitioned with such bloodshed that the British Empire was over, and that Britain should hand over all its colonies as soon as possible, and that Britain should stop pretending that it was a world-beating power like the United States of America. Powell decided that the role of any British government or any sane British government should be to advocate for the British people. And he realized by the 1960s that the British government was doing exactly the opposite. And so he gave a famous speech in Birmingham, and it was called the Rivers of Blood speech, which is something of a misnomer. Powell was not calling for bloodshed. See, one of the parallelisms that Curtis makes between Michael X and Enoch Powell is that Enoch Powell was not charged for race hatred as the result of his speech at the West Midlands Area Conservative Political Center on April the 20th, 1968, whereas Michael X was actually jailed for inciting racial hatred. One of the things that Michael X had said is that any white man who put his hands on a black woman should be murdered, which is clearly incitement. What Enoch Powell did was to make a prediction. And he begins, the supreme function of statesmanship is to provide against preventable evils. In seeking to do so, it encounters obstacles which are deeply rooted in human nature. One is that by the very order of things, such evils are not demonstrable until they have occurred. At each stage in their onset, there is room for doubt and for dispute whether they be real or imaginary. By the same token, they attract little attention in comparison with current troubles, which are both indisputable and pressing. Whence the besetting temptation of all politics to concern itself with the immediate present at the expense of the future. Above all, people are disposed to mistake predicting troubles for causing troubles and even for desiring troubles. If only, they love to think, if only people wouldn't talk about it, it probably wouldn't happen. Perhaps this habit goes back to the primitive belief that the word and the thing, the name and the object are identical. Well, this is exactly what happened to Enoch Powell. He was accused of calling for a race war in Britain, and in fact, the purpose of his speech was the exact opposite, to prevent one. After this speech, Powell suddenly became the most popular politician in Britain. Dock workers in London went on strike in support of Powell, but the entire establishment, from the editor of the London Times to Edward Heath, leader of the Conservative Party, turned on Powell. He was an unperson. And incredibly, you have people like Peter Hitchens and the like somehow arguing that, oh, yes, we can't say anything about race relations in Britain because of Enoch Powell. Why? Because what he said turned out to be right? Powell continued, a week or two ago, I fell into conversation with a constituent, a middle-aged, quite ordinary working man employed in one of our nationalized industries. After a sentence or two about the weather, he suddenly said, if I had the money to go, I wouldn't stay in this country. I made some deprecatory reply to the effect that even this government wouldn't last forever, but he took no notice and continued. I have 3 children. All of them have been through the grammar school, and 2 of them married now with family. I shan't be satisfied till I've seen them settled overseas. In this country, in 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man. Powell comments, I can already hear the chorus of execration. How dare I say such a horrible thing? How dare I stir up trouble and inflame feelings by repeating such a conversation? Well, yes, the whip hand. So Piers Morgan gets to sit there in his chair in Good Morning Britain and to be told, you are not black, so you don't know what racism is. We will tell you what racism is. And apparently someone who'd starred in a show called Dancing on Ice becomes a philosopher of race relations. Powell continued, the answer is that I do not have the right not to do so. Here is a decent, ordinary fellow Englishman who in broad daylight in my own town says to me, his member of parliament, that this country will not be worth living in for his children. I simply do not have the right to shrug my shoulders and think about something else. What he is saying, thousands and hundreds of thousands are saying and thinking, not throughout Great Britain perhaps, but in the areas that are already undergoing the total transformation to which there is no parallel in 1,000 years of English history. In 15 or 20 years on present trends, there will be in this country 3.5 million Commonwealth immigrants and their descendants. That is not my figure. That is the official figure given to Parliament by the spokesman of the Registrar General's office. There is no comparable official figure for the year 2000, but it must be in the region of 5 to 7 million, approximately 1/10 of the whole population and approaching that of Greater London. Of course, it will not be evenly distributed from Margate to Aberystwyth and from Penzance to Aberdeen. Whole areas, towns, and parts of towns across England will be occupied by different sections of the immigrant and immigrant-descended population. As time goes on, the proportion of this total who are immigrant descendants, those born in England, who arrived here by exactly the same route as the rest of us, will rapidly increase. Already by 1985, the native-born would constitute the majority. It is this fact, above all, which creates the extreme urgency of action now, of just that kind of action which is hardest for politicians to take. Actions where the difficulties lie in the present, but the evils to be prevented or minimized lie several parliaments ahead. So what does England look like today? Well, there is a plague of so-called knife crime in England, and we don't really want to get into that too deeply because it would be dangerous, wouldn't it? There's the astonishing phenomenon that for 20 years, all the authorities in several British towns, from the police to the local councils, right up to members of parliament, decided to keep silent about rape and grooming gangs run by Pakistani immigrants. No. We will let these thousands of women be turned out into prostitutes because it would be troublesome to bring up this issue. It could, it's more than my job's worth. That was their view. Powell continued, it almost passes belief that at this moment, 20 or 30 additional immigrant children are arriving from overseas in Wolverhampton alone every week, and that means 15 or 20 additional families of a decade or two hence. Those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. We must be mad, literally mad, as a nation to be permitting the annual inflow of some 50,000 dependents who are, for the most part, the material of the future growth of the immigrant-descended population. It is like watching a nation busily engaged in heaping up its own funeral pyre. What Powell was saying in his speech, essentially, was that Englishmen were being made foreigners in their own country. And of course, London is a non-majority English city now, which apparently is a cause for celebration for some reason, because it's not as if the English ever accomplished anything in the world. Let's have a look at the chat. I favor doubling welfare payments, says Gandalf White II. Is there a book about grooming gangs? Asks Andrew B. I'll have to take a look at that. Tricky Who says, almost forgot to hit the like button. The West Midlands are a dump now. He was correct. And Gandalf White says Meghan needs a show every day where she can lecture us all on racism daily. Yeah, this woman doesn't have any powers of self-reflection, and that can be very useful. If one is ambitious, she might look at herself in the mirror and say, if prejudice against people like me is so powerful and widespread, then how did I get to be where I am today? Is it because of some vast talent that she has? No, not at all. Not at all. Oh, okay. My Trail of Disgrace says there's Peter McLaughlin's easy meat inside Britain's grooming gang scandal and several personal memoirs. British American says UK literally can't accommodate more than about 60 million people. It's smaller than Japan, for crying out loud. Well, my country is a very large country as opposed to England, but of course, most Canadians, 70%, 80%, live within 50 miles of the US border. My government has decided to import more than 1.2 million people. And these are overwhelmingly going to be coming from the third world as family reunification immigrants in 3 years, 1.2 million in 3 years. Where are they going to live? Well, they are going to live primarily in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. And one of the results of Canada's immigration policy has been that those of us who grew up as Canadians in Canada can no longer afford to live in the places where we grew up, because all these immigrants, they have to live somewhere. Andrew B says feminism equals continually declining birth rates forever. Raheem Kassam has a book out about Enoch Powell and the demographic changes, says Steve. Well, power, political power is one of the themes of Adam Curtis's latest documentary. And he constantly refers to Black politicians or activists in the United States and Britain talking about Black power and the lack of power that Black people have. Well, I would ask the question, who is afraid of whom in those countries? I think if you look at that question, you can determine wherein the power lies. That white people are terrified of Black people. Canada, the United States, and Britain, they're terrified of them physically, and they're terrified that they will be accused of racism, which is a career-ending insult, sometimes even a life-ending insult. So again, I ask, where is the power distributed? And I think we know the answer to that, but we don't like to talk about it. Let's take a look at Lockdown Skeptics for today, which is compiled, doesn't say who it's compiled by. Children around the country, that is England, this morning will be returning to the classroom, although most secondary school pupils won't go back until later in the week. And for many, it'll be the first time they've seen it since the end of last year. According to a survey by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, parents are strongly in favor of children going back to school. Teaching unions, meanwhile, are risking finding themselves out of step with parents. The Telegraph reports that they are warning parents that the return to school might turn out to be temporary if not enough students wear masks. At least they have the wit to blame the school's insurance policies rather than fears of their members. Stop press. Not all parents are happy to send their children back to school. The Telegraph has an interview with one mother who sadly is still very frightened. We must protect our NHS. This was the core justification for the lockdown. By staying at home, we would reduce transmission and curtail the exponential growth of hospitalizations and deaths so that the NHS could be there for us when we need it. Now the NHS is pressured by a large backlog of patients, and according to analysis released yesterday by the NHS Confederation, the official number might be only scratching the surface. According to the Telegraph, the NHS is facing a hidden backlog of 6 million patients who have not come forward for treatment because of the pandemic, health leaders have warned. Well, given that apparently 41% of those with COVID-19 in England have been infected in hospitals, I guess they have a very good reason for avoiding them. Fans of the Rangers soccer team streamed into the streets to celebrate a victory And the Karens were very upset about this. Nicola Sturgeon warned Rangers fans that they were risking their lives as they gathered in their thousands to celebrate their side's first Scottish Premiership title in a decade. We'll see how long Nicola Sturgeon has her job. She rather botched the Alex Salmond investigation. Dr. Susan Hopkins of Public Health England used an appearance on the Andrew Marr show yesterday to warn that the UK might be in for a difficult autumn and a hard winter in the face of new variants of COVID-19 and a potential surge in other respiratory viruses. She said that the population may have less immunity to respiratory viruses such as flu due to the coronavirus pandemic. She told the BBC's Andrew Marr show that it was highly unlikely that a new COVID variant would derail the plan to start easing England's lockdown for the next 3 to 5 weeks. But she added, we'll need to monitor carefully as new strains come into the country from around the world. We need to be very ready for an autumn that could be challenging as these variants are there. But we're also very conscious of the fact that what happened last summer, in late summer and early September, could happen again. And we need to prepare for that and hope that it doesn't happen. She said it was really difficult to predict what was going to happen in the future, but we have to prepare for a hard winter. 6 months away is a long time, she told Marr. A hard winter, not only with coronavirus, but we've had a year of almost no respiratory viruses of any other type. I wonder why that might be. This means potentially the population immunity to that is less. So we could see surges in flu, we could see surges in other respiratory viruses and other respiratory pathogens. It's really important that we're prepared from the NHS point of view, from public health and contact tracing, that we have everything ready to prepare for a difficult autumn. She said that she believed we will all have our summer holidays, but her job is to prepare for worst case scenarios. Do you get the impression that these people are really enjoying what's happening now? I was a lowly bureaucrat and no one had heard of me. Now I'm saying that normal is over. Yes, this society has been abolished. What a thrill of power they must have. From Lockdown Skeptics again, a new essay for AIER by Ethan Yang asks one of the big questions. Do we still have the will to continue as a free society? It is addressed to an American audience, but the question is relevant to the UK as well. First, Yang looks at a speech by President Donald Trump praising the Polish people for their indomitable spirit. What happens when our cherished freedoms are taken away by elected leaders with the apparent approval of our fellow citizens? Asked Yang. Today, America and Europe find themselves under brutal lockdown measures that, in addition to not actually stopping the virus, have completely subdued our societies economically, socially, culturally, and spiritually. Although many people support lockdowns because they believe they will help control the virus, others genuinely see them as a means to fundamentally change American society out of spite for our individualistic values. Look no further than the common narrative that selfish Americans won't wear their masks and that's why the virus is spreading. Not only are masks ineffective at stopping COVID-19 in the way they are advertised, but the United States actually has some of the highest reported mask-wearing rates in North America and Europe. An article published by Forbes warned against doing your own research when it comes to COVID-19 and parroted the tired listen to the experts line. Not only is this an attack on the very notion of the scientific method, as well as an informed citizenry, but such a strategy would have clearly led us down the road to technocracy, and a misinformed one at that. Such uninformed hysteria around COVID sounds like a concern for stopping the virus and more of a less than a concern for stopping the virus and more of a cultural wedge against traditional American ideas of individual liberty. Sadly, it seems that many members of the public are either afraid or apathetic when it comes to preserving and reclaiming the free society that is our birthright. Poland is a shining example of a raw desire to exist as a coherent civilization after being dismembered time and time again. Today, that same question exists for America and the rest of the world, Western world more generally. Do we have the will to continue to exist as a free and polite society steeped in the ideas of liberty, reason, and justice? Or have we succumbed to a tragic case of civilizational fatigue, where we are now disinterested in holding on to what we used to be? Without a serious commitment to reclaiming our freedom and prosperity, we put ourselves on the path towards becoming a washed-up has-been civilization, weighed down by an authoritarian boot of our own design. So I'm going to talk now on Music Monday about a band from Memphis, Tennessee called Big Star. But I will first check in with the chat. Gandalf White says, we've succumbed to the civilizational fatigue as we enter the Spenglerian winter. I don't know if we will get a brief Caesarian renaissance or not. British American says, we need to be ruled again by a natural aristocracy whose self-esteem is not bound up with their political offices. Tricky Who says, protect the NHS from what? Flamboyant choreographers? British American again, the teachers pay to put students' bums in seats. That'll get the teachers back in the classroom right quick like. They don't seem to be any hurry. Again, my joke, if the teachers dream to get not 3 months off a year, but 12 months off a year and still get paid, it's become close to a reality. So I suppose the story of a Big Star begins with a man called John Fry. He was born in 1944 and he died in 2014. And he was an entrepreneur. He began Ardent Records. He began recording, doing commercial recordings out of his own garage, and eventually acquired a studio and learned how to be an engineer. And Ardent was closely associated with Stax Records, a great soul music label of the 1960s. An awful lot of Stax recording was actually done in Ardent Studios. And John Fry, most of the people in the record industry are very worried about their expensive equipment. Indeed, you will read, about the old days of music producers where they used to wear lab coats like scientists. But John Fry would let people like Chris Bell come into the studio late at night when it wasn't booked. And he taught Chris Bell how to record and mix records. Chris Bell had been involved in the Memphis music scene since the mid-1960s. And I suppose he was what you would call an Anglophile. That the British invasion music of the 1960s was just a thunderclap to so many across America. And Chris Bell was one of them. And you see that Chris Bell appears playing guitar in an early recording of another engineer and musician named Terry Manning, who was closely associated with Big Star. Alex Chilton was a teenage star. He fronted a band, which was really sort of a made-up band, studio band called the Box Tops. And he sang lead on a song in 1967 called The Letter, which was written by Wayne Carson and produced by Dan Penn. And it was a #1 hit around the world. The Box Tops were not, as some falsely claim, one-hit wonders. They actually had several hits. But Alex Chilton was not given the opportunity to contribute much creatively to the group. And for a band that had a handful of hits, including a #1 song around the world, he did not seem to realize much money out of the Box Tops. So he quit in 1969. And he decided that he was going to get better at playing the guitar, and he was going to devote himself to writing songs. Chris Bell had known Alex Chilton since they were teenagers. They had both been in a lot of bands and had played with each other. And Alex Chilton was invited into a Chris Bell project, which became Big Star. Pretty ambitious name for a band. And of course, they were rather tempting fate Their first album was called Number One Record. Well, it didn't get to be anything like a number one record for several reasons. I suppose the heavily British invasion styled music was rather out of step with the times. In the early 70s, it was all singer-songwriters with long hair and beards. But also because of the state of Ardent and Stax. That Stax had been cruelly tricked by Ahmet Erdogan of Atlantic Records. And it was discovered Atlantic agreed to distribute Stax Records, but there was a clause in the contract that by 1968 or whatever, all of the masters belonged to Atlantic. So essentially Stax lost everybody. And they signed as many people as they could in an attempt to get the label back up again, but it never really worked. Ardent Records, like Stax, were supposedly distributed by CBS or Columbia. But of course, Columbia had its own artists, and why would a company like Columbia, as it were, discriminate against its own artists for people from another record company? Both Big Star's records, the first two, were praised to the skies by the critics. And in fact, Billboard famously said of their first record that every cut on it could be a single. That's how good people thought the record was. But you couldn't find it in the stores. Again, there used to be these things called record stores. And there's people whose job it was to put records in the stores. And if your record didn't get in the stores, then you didn't sell any records. I had been reading about Big Star for years, and I was anxious to get their records, but there was no way that I could, at least not until I visited London in 1976, where I managed to buy both their first and second records at the Virgin Record Store on New Oxford Street. I guess a lot of people were doing the same thing because the cult of Big Star began not in America, but in England in the 1960s. Chris Bell was a tormented man. He was a Christian, an ardent Christian, but he also had strong homosexual leanings, which he attempted to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. He became quite violent after the failure of the first Big Star album. And they began a second one, and he worked on some of the songs that appeared on it. But eventually he quit the band. His father was a wealthy man. And Chris went to Europe. And despite hiring Jeff Emmerich as Beatles fame as an engineer, the demos that he recorded, he could not get anybody, any record label, to release them. Eventually, a combination of these recordings, many of which were made at the Chateau de Harouville in France, were released by Rykodisc in 1992 under the title "I Am the Cosmos." It's a beautiful and sad record, and I think the American critic Robert Christgau, upon hearing "I Am the Cosmos," said that it became obvious that Big Star was really Chris Bell's project. That John Fry is credited as the producer of the first Big Star record, but Chris Bell could have easily have claimed a producer's credit. It's clear that he arranged all of the songs on the record. And one of the things you notice in the difference between the first and the second records was the inclusion of harmonies on pretty much every song. It's really, if you hear the first Big Star record and then you hear the second one, which begins with a cut for some reason in mono called Oh My Soul, you can just see how radical the change is. That I suppose, Big Star was, at least on the first record, was rather a combination of of Chris Bell's chamber pop sensibilities and Alex Chilton's wilder experimentations. Chris Bell died at the age of 27 in 1978 in a one-car accident outside of Memphis. And, you know, when you're looking at one-car accidents or, you know, this people falling off cliffs or the like, this is often a disguised suicide. It's said of Chris Bell that one of the last times that anyone had ever seen him happy was when he was told about the tremendous amount of interest in Big Star in England. He suffered the humiliation of being reduced to working in one of his father's businesses when foreigners and, well, Americans as well would show up and say, "You're Chris Bell, aren't you?" as he was stacking the shelves in a supermarket. There is a third Big Star record, which is alternately called Third or Sister Lovers. And it's called Sister Lovers because the two remaining members of the band, Alex Chilton and Jody Stevens, were both dating. They were dating sisters. And there's a considerable argument as to whether this is really a Big Star record or whether it's an Alex Chilton solo record. Unlike the first two, it was produced by a fellow called Jim Dickinson, who died in 2009 as a legendary figure in rock music. And Jim Dickinson loved wild things. And the recording of the third record was a wild experience. They a long way from Chris Bell with his search for perfection in the studio. Jim Dickinson liked things that, well, didn't sound good, one might say. In addition, well, this is an album that was made in 1975, but it was not released until 1978 on a minor label. There have been all sorts of versions of this record. There was never an official track listing. Jim Dickinson put together one in 1992, again published by Ryko Disc. Alex Chilton had become extraordinarily bitter at the time, and he deprecated the Big Star records later in his life. I think because he knew that there was an implied comment on him when people praised Big Star. That is to say, you once did great things, and what are you doing now? So he says that people made too much of them. The songs that Alex Chilton wrote for the third album are typically depressed. Some people said depressing. The record was shopped around to various labels, and they were horrified by it. Absolutely horrified. They said that, this is the most depressing record that I've ever heard. So it's a very strange record. There's covers on it. The Kinks song, Till the End of the Day, Lou Reed's Velvet Underground song, Femme Fatale, and curiously, a song called Nature Boy, which was a hit in 1948 for Nat King Cole. And it was written by a very strange man called Eden Abez. And Alex Chilton's, or Big Star's version of it is very simple. Him singing and the famed Memphis photographer William Eggleston at the piano. You can see a copy of Eggleston's perhaps most famous photograph, which is normally referred to as the Red Ceiling, on the cover of the second Big Star album. And I must say, it's a particularly beautiful cover of Nature Boy by Alex Chilton. So after the final collapse of Big Star, Alex Chilton got out of town and he moved to New York City where he started his solo career and working with Chris Stamey, who was formerly of the DBs, producer of Peter Blegvad and others. Obviously, a man who was very influenced by Big Star. You know, I want to say about the third record. This is a story typical of Alex Chilton. That one of the songs on it is called "You Can't Have Me," you know, at least not for free. He sings, and someone at Ardent heard it and said this could be a hit single. So Alex Chilton decided to sabotage the recording of it by inserting a parping saxophone and a whole bunch of nonsense in an attempt to make it virtually unlistenable. That's the kind of man he was. You know, his first solo record, LP, Like Flies on Sherbet, was issued in an edition of 500 copies. Now, that's not the way that one becomes successful. Chilton didn't have much money for the rest of his life, although after Big Star, the Bangles covered September Girls from the second album, and that brought in royalties. And, of course, one of the songs that Bell and Chilton had written, In the Street, became the theme of that 70s show, or as Chilton said, I believe that $70 show, because every time the show was played on the air, Alex Chilton got $70. You know, Chilton retired from the music business for several years and worked, among other things, as a dishwasher in a restaurant. He traveled to London in 1980 to make a live album at a club called Dingwalls. And a crack backing band, which included Matthew Seligman and the guitarist Knox, was assembled for him. But it was Alex Chilton's view that no, too much rehearsal spoiled the spontaneity, and he didn't want to fall into that trap. With the result that the Live in London record that he made is certainly wild and passionate, but it is an absolute train wreck. And again, you know, you see with Chilton throughout his career, he does everything possible to put people off his music. And it's very sad, actually. He reminds me of, in some ways, of Jonathan Richman. And again, the Modern Lovers were a legendary band in the 1970s, long before anyone had heard their music. That he had recorded a bunch of demos with John Cale and others. And these have been brought out over the years in various packages. Jonathan Richman was a fanatical Velvet Underground fan. The joke was that Jonathan Richman had been to more Velvet Underground concerts than Lou Reed. And people were thrilled by the first Modern Lovers record, which I highly recommend. But Jonathan Richman decided that this was depressing music and he didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore, and that he was going to make a different kind of music. For instance, the Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers album, which came out in 1976. Richman actually had hits in the United Kingdom. It's a weird record, you know, with songs about little insects and abominable snowmen and buildings being embarrassed of their corporate logo, that sort of thing. He became rather, you could say, a children's entertainer. And I don't know, it's, you know, not for me to say, but I felt rather cheated at this. Not that, you know, Jonathan Richman owed me anything. But again, you know, I see a similarity with Alex Chilton. Chilton, he got the Box Tops together. He would sing songs like Volare in concert, that sort of thing. He produced the Cramps, and he put Big Star together again. Now, it's Big Star without Chris Bell or Andy Hummel, the bass player. But they brought in two members of the Posies, and they recorded an album called In Space in 2005, which I do not recommend, not in the slightest. It is no good. But Chilton would regularly tour with this version of Big Star, and they made some live records, which are pretty good. And Chilton was living in New Orleans, where his house was demolished by Hurricane Katrina, and he had to be rescued by helicopter. He suddenly developed heart problems and died of a heart attack. And in 2010, at the age of 59, I think that Alex Chilton was a man who didn't really look after his health very well. A lot of people used his death as an attack, to attack the American government on political reasons, because Chilton didn't have health insurance. It seems to me that Chilton had more than enough money to buy health insurance, but that would mean, planning for one's future. And Alex Chilton didn't like to do that. There is a documentary about Big Star called Nothing Can Hurt Me, which I highly recommend. But it's a sad story. I suppose it's good to know. I mean, it's heartwarming to know that Big Star has so many fans now. But it didn't do much for the members of the band at a time when it would have been particularly useful for them. Both the first and second Big Star albums are unmissable, and of course, there wouldn't be an REM without Big Star. I mean, that much is obvious, and they've admitted it. And the Replacements were big fans of Big Star. Of course, they wrote a song called Alex Chilton. Children in their millions cry out for Alex Chilton. It's a sweet thing to say. It wasn't true, of course. But I say about Big Star that, as I said, I first heard the records in 1976, and they had a big effect on me, particularly the first one, that the music is so often beautiful, and it showed that, what was possible for four young men to do in the recording studio. And it certainly stands up. Both of the records, the first two, stand up. The third one is, I don't know, I consider it, say, Big Star's Syd Barrett record. Syd Barrett, after he left Pink Floyd, he put out two solo albums. And I have to be in a particular state of mind to listen to them, because they are records made by a madman. There's no doubting that he was a madman when he made that record. Years ago, when I was living in Vancouver, my girlfriend used to spend a lot of money getting her hair done. She went to more and more expensive places. Eventually, she ended up at this place downtown where I think it was like $100 for a woman to have her hair done. Keep in mind, this was 1998 or something. And so this takes about an hour. So I walked a couple of blocks to a magazine store, and I bought a copy of Mojo, which is the magazine for people who like old music. And they had a feature on Chris Bell. And it was in this article that I learned a lot about him that I didn't know. For instance, his torment, but his homosexual urges. And so I read the story. And then I returned to the hair salon to pick up my girlfriend, and she noticed that I seemed to be affected. And she asked me why, and I said, Don't worry about it. And she kept pushing me. So I said, I've read this, piece about Chris Bell. And I talked about his life. And she said, what do you care? You hate the gays. And I thought, but didn't say, I don't know about that, but I certainly hate you now. So let's go back to the chat, see what's happening there. Jim Bowden says today's science is ideological. Soros, Rothschild, Billy Gates, and many other Bilderberg, happy small hats, members of Davos. How old was KMG in 1998? I would have turned 43 in that year. Teenage Fan Club had an album named 13 after the Big Star song. Also a song, Big Star, on another album. Well, what did I promise myself I wasn't going to say this? That it was supposedly Brian Eno who said about the Velvet Underground that they didn't sell many records, but everyone who bought a Velvet Underground album formed a band. And the same thing has been said about Big Star. Ogan's Iron says, where is that? Sometimes I speak as a scientist, sometimes as a politician. Depends on how I feel, says Dr. Anthony Fauci. Yeah. Alex Chilton, like Richmond or Lawrence, have felt he has been accused of being difficult, self-sabotaged. Yes, indeed. Jim Bowden says, once the whole world believed in Aristotelian science, then came Galileo, Copernicus, Newton, and finally Dr. Fauci. Wow, what a letdown. My Trail of Disgrace says, I love the sound of Third. It has a lot of ambient space and much sounds like it was recorded at night with the influence of lewds and alcohol. Well, the recording went on for a very long time. And Alex Chilton's girlfriend, Lisa, one of the sisters, sang on a lot of the tracks. Now, you can hear on the version we have her singing on the Lou Reed song Femme Fatale, but apparently she was on a lot of other tracks, but they had a very tempestuous relationship, as they say, and he removed her from most of the record. But John Fry, who was almost a saintly man, pulled the plug on the Third project because Chilton had gotten so out of control that he one day attacked a soundboard. And John Fry said something like, I cannot have blood on the mixing board. That's how out of control Chilton became. But I don't know, the rock business seems to induce insanity in a lot of people. Jimmy Miller, the drummer and producer who produced Traffic and most famously the Rolling Stones, he parted with the Stones. Actually, he was the half brother of Judith Miller of Iraq infamy. How about that, eh? He was reduced to circa 1992, despite the fact that he was Jewish, carving swastikas into a mixing board with a knife. I suppose it's at that time, that you say, yeah, I think that we should part company now. Is there an 80s band you hate? I don't know. I'd have to think about that. This happens to me all the time, that if someone asks me, give me a list of, things that you like, I go blank. Kevin, do you ever wonder why you still listen to music aimed at much younger people? Oh, because I grew up with it. It's what I know, I suppose. That they say that the most important influences in one's life are those that generally happen between the ages of, say, 15 and 25. Yeah, there is a hypothesis which is associated with a French filmmaker that the reason that we feel so close to things that happened when we were young is because they were new experiences to us. The older you get in life, the fewer new experiences that you have. Essentially, you get to a certain age, and essentially everything you do in life is something that you've done many times before. Michel Gondry is the filmmaker who came up with this theory. And it strikes me as being true. You know, Richard Ingram's, the English editor, once noted the strange phenomenon that when people are asked about what was the happiest period of their life, they invariably say their childhood. And this is true even of people who had objectively bad childhoods. And again, I think the reason for this is that the things that you experience in childhood are the things that are resonate most powerfully with you, because again, they are new. They are new experiences. Okay, so do the jam, KMG. British American says, for any New Order fans, check out Live in Berlin 2012 on YouTube. I had someone who was, I suppose you could say, part of my extended family, who was a guitarist, but he used to work rock shows, you know, setting up equipment. And when New Order came to Vancouver, he said the guy who set up the synthesizer gear was actually much better on these instruments than the woman who played them. So what is coming up on the KMG show later this week? On Thursday, Theatre Thursday, I'm going to be discussing an Irish film from 2011 called The Guard, directed by John Michael McDonagh. And then March the 18th, have a little fun, talk about films which are in no way art, the two Valley of the Dolls films, which are most amusing, even if the first one is not intended to be. On the book club this Friday, I'm going to be talking about a book about libertarians in New Hampshire called A Libertarian Walks into a Bear by Matthew Hungoltz Hetling. And then a week after that, I'm going to be discussing Tom Wolfe's final novel, Back to Blood. And on Music Monday next week, I'm going to be talking about Joseph Haydn, one of my favorite composers. But I call it a true underdog story because we often hear stories about, you know, the travails of famous composers, and Haydn's triumph over the catastrophe of his youth after his voice broke and being kicked out of the choir at St. Stephen's Cathedral is one of the most remarkable stories, although it isn't talked about much. Essentially, Haydn was a self-taught as a composer. Again, remarkable. So that is the show for today. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Yaka Rapala, our Finnish friend, says, I think that's why new music stops being interesting when you get older. It's only superficially new. The underlying stuff is recycled. Yes. If you would like to donate to this live stream, which would be exceedingly well appreciated at this time, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can, or live in Canada, you can contribute to make a donation to this live stream via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And Dionysa says, KMG, this is depressing since I am 40 now. I am hoping for more new experiences. It's a trade-off, really. You know, you find when you grow older that you look back on the things that used to exercise you when you were a young man, and they seem foolish. You know, part of it is boredom, I suppose, but another part is maturity. But I always like to repeat what Irving Kristol once said. We can't always be happy, but we must always strive to be cheerful. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.